Hey guys, so there is an interesting benchmark going around right now about the Switch apparently, and I don't really know where this benchmark came from or how it got tied to the Switch. A lot of people are saying that it's from the same place that disassembled that Switch that we saw and took pictures of it and everything, but from what I thought, they were disassembling defective systems and not having fully running ones, or this one maybe was a running system. They took it apart and they put it back together. I'm not sure. The story doesn't really seem to fit together perfectly. But there's this benchmark that came out that's using a what's called Julia benchmark, and it's going to then tell us how fast the system is altogether and give us an idea of its performance. However, when I looked at this benchmark, I noticed some very odd things, and right away I'm pretty sure what we're seeing. Now again, I can't tell you I'm absolutely sure, obviously, because the only person that knows what's going on is the person who actually took this benchmark or took apart that Switch, if it's the same person, and they'd be able to tell us. Unfortunately, whatever they seem to put out there needs to be heavily translated for us to even understand it over here, so I'm not really sure in that case, but I can at least give you an idea of what I think is going on here. So I looked around, and I also looked at a couple different conversations about this as well. I had a couple conversations with people on forums and stuff, and right away, I could tell from this benchmark you're seeing here up next to me right now, whoever ran this benchmark had root access from what we could tell, and they were able to run benchmarks, and usually you can't just do that on a retail unit. Like, if we got a Switch, I don't think we'd be able to hook it up to a system, gain root access, and then run this benchmark. I could be wrong, but if you had root access to the Switch, you would do a lot more than just benchmark it. You would probably try to modify it. So that was the signal to me right away. That it was a dev kit, is they appear to have root access. Now, if you have a dev kit, you probably can get root access, absolutely, because you are, of course, developing on the unit for then a retail Switch, and you're using the dev kit to do that, where you could run programs alongside it or gain access to things you shouldn't have access to from a retail unit. So here we go. Let's look at this benchmark really well, and we actually had some people over on the Reddit that translate over on Reddit Translator, which is awesome. They do some great work. They translate stuff from different languages to help people out, especially if you ask them. They're usually pretty cool about it. In this case, they actually helped us by translating everything we saw there in that imager picture that went along with the picture you're seeing here. And what happened is, at the top, they seem to have the ARM v8 cores, or the architecture being ARM. So ARM v8 could pretty much be, it could be A57s, it could be the A73s or whatever. It basically, ARM v8 falls into all those different CPUs. It doesn't tell us one or the other, or what's being used here. But from there, it does say that it has 516 cores. And when I read that, I figured that that means 512 CUDA cores and then 4 of the standard CPU cores that are active at that time, which makes sense. Well, except for the 512 CUDA cores. Right away when I figured that, I said, oh, 512 CUDA cores. I'm not really sure how they would fit that in the chip. Now, if you start putting these cores in there, they need to go somewhere. And based on the die that we've seen so far in that teardown, I don't really know where they would go. Now, they could remove, so my one theory, without getting too far ahead here, they could have removed some stuff from the chip if it is a custom chip. For example, in the big little configuration we talk about, maybe they don't need those A53s if it's an A53, A57 set for that octa-core, big little quad-core set. Maybe they take those out and add some more that way, but you wouldn't fit another 256 CUDA cores in there. You'd have to start taking a lot more stuff out, or make the die would have to be bigger. You'd have to have a place to put it. And looking at the one that we saw taken apart, I don't really know how they would fit those in there. Again, I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying it'd be interesting to see the chip if it had 512 CUDA cores, just to see what they came up with. Now, again, it's possible. I just don't think it's very likely. So the benchmark tells us in handheld mode. Okay, this is in their handheld mode that they have set up for this benchmark. They have the CPU cores sitting at 726 megahertz, which when you have a quad-core array with certain applications, you really only need 2 cores that are actually moving along. And then their lowest grade here for the CPU frequencies, they give us 314 megahertz at idle, and that's fine. That makes sense. I mean, it can drop pretty low if it's not it's not needed. And from there, they tell us that the GPU is clocked at 275 megahertz, giving us a total gigaflops benchmark of 375 gigaflops at floating point 32, which is pretty good. That's actually really good. A lot of people on NeoGAF and stuff actually had the Wii U chip sent away to Chipworks. They scanned it and everything. Came back that the Wii U is like in the 180 gigaflop range at floating point 32. A lot of people originally thought it was like 370 or something like that, but quickly found out that after getting the chip scan and doing some math that it was like 180 gigaflops, somewhere around there. So this would actually put the Switch, if this is the case, twice as powerful as the Wii U in handheld mode, and that's pretty good, actually. Because also remember, keep in mind, the Switch, when it's in handheld mode, is 720p, so it's not even, like, that's like 720p is actually much easier to push along an image than at 1080. People don't realize how much of a difference it is. It's actually a pretty big difference. From there, the benchmark goes on to talk about how when the system is docked, the CPU, apparently all the cores, jump to over 2 gigahertz, 2.1 about, and then the GPU jumps to about 1 gigahertz. That's not a big deal since we do know that the GPU for the X1 can get to 1 gigahertz anyway, but it does seem to turn in a benchmark score of 875 gigaflops at floating point 32, which is really high. That's actually like 80 to 85% of what we could expect from that compared to the Xbox One, especially when you factor in things like the ability to use Vulkan and NVN and any of the other optimizing softwares that they have built into their operating system. Now, I talked about how I think this might be a dev kit. One was the root access thing kind of stuck out to me. The other thing, though, is we're expected to believe this is a system on a chip, which makes sense. Everything's all located on that one chip that we saw in the pictures. That's just how Tegra's, how a lot of these chips are now. And the thing that sticks out to me is the temperature difference doesn't seem to make sense for it to be a system on a chip. Now, according to this benchmark, it's measuring the temperatures as well. It gives us a 57 degrees Celsius temperature on the CPU side, which is fine. That is jumping up from a 31 degree temperature when it's idling at low. That makes sense as well. But it does give us a GPU rating for the temperature at 65 degrees Celsius. Now, if it's on one chip, the temperature difference should be very small, like within a degree or two. And this seems to tell us that there is a large difference, anywhere from 8 to 10 degree difference, and that doesn't make sense if it's on the same chip. What I think is happening here is if this is a dev kit, it has either a GPU that is separate from the CPU, or this isn't a Switch at all. So that's the other interesting thing to think about is we don't really know what this is exactly. All we know is we have a benchmark here from what apparently is the same site that took it apart, allegedly, and it just shows us a benchmark that is very, very promising. Now, don't get me wrong, if this is a Switch or even a dev kit, because keep in mind, dev kits are usually stronger than the actual system, but in this case, the system itself could still be in the ballpark of what a dev kit is. And if this is the case, that means that the Switch would be very powerful. For being in a form factor that is as small as most tablets, this is a very impressive amount of power to be packed in there. And yes, this would make sense as to why so many developers talking about, oh, this is awesome, we're going to port this, that, and the other thing to this. It works well, it's very easy to port to, this is great. That would make sense why they are so excited for this device, because it's so small, packs all of this power, great. But based on this benchmark alone, I would be very, very wary of this benchmark, and I would wait for others to come out, because once this NDA is up, and apparently dev kits are cheap. So like anyone can apparently buy a dev kit as long as you are at least promising to make a game or talking about making a game. They apparently would sell you one for about $500, which is great. But I don't think I would trust this benchmark 100%. At least I would take it with like I said, a grain of salt, or at least understand that this benchmark here may not be a Switch or even a Switch dev kit. It could really be anything. It's very odd though, because it is using an ARM set, and it's counting 516 cores, like we were saying. We think it's 512 CUDA cores, 4 of the regular CPU cores. And the temperature difference is enough to where maybe it's not a system on a chip. Maybe it's a set of processors that are ARM apparently, and then a GPU that is separate from it. It's so weird. This benchmark is so weird to look at. But you know what? If it turns out that this is a Switch benchmark of some kind, great. The Switch is way more powerful than a lot of people were thinking it'd be, because that would put it very, very close to the Xbox One when docked. We'll see. We're so close to getting the system out. A lot of people already have it for their press stuff, and I know from the rumor is that the NDA on that is up in like a week, not even. So we're going to start seeing some Switch reviews. We'll start hearing about how the visuals look to them and frame rates and everything. We'll go from there. But right now, I would not take this benchmark as gospel. I would take it as that would be really cool. We'll have to see. But let me know what you guys think down in the comments. It's always fun to read what you guys think about these benchmarks. Keep in mind, this would place the Switch at 875 gigaflops, floating point 32, which is very good considering the Xbox One is right around 1.3 teraflops. So that would place that roughly 450 or so gigaflops above this. But again, the NVIDIA flop rule is that it's stronger, so who really knows where this will place it? All I do know is this is enough to get it current ports, if that's the case, and you can expect a lot of these games to come over. We recently heard that Capcom is working to get Resident Evil 7 over, which if that's not telling enough for the Switch's power, that's interesting, right? So, we'll see. Let me know what you guys think down below. I will see you next time.